At Thanksgiving, my dad announced, "We're selling the family business. You're getting nothing." My brothers erupted. I smiled. "Dad, who's the buyer?" He proudly said, "Apex Innovations. They're paying $50 million. I laughed. "Dad, I am Apex Innovations." The room went silent. "My name is Caleb Vance. I'm 32 years old, and I am the forgotten middle child of the Vance software dynasty." That title might sound dramatic, but trust me, for most of my life, it felt less like a role and more like a permanent state of being. The Bentley purred as it turned onto the long, familiar driveway, crunching over the first of November's fallen leaves. Every year, I made this same pilgrimage back to our Boston mansion for Thanksgiving, and every year, the same knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. It wasn't the cold weather. It was the chillingly predictable atmosphere I was about to walk into. From the outside, the sprawling colonial estate looked like a postcard for the American dream. 6 bedrooms, a heated indoor pool, and a lawn so vast it required 3 full-time gardeners. But inside those walls, it was a different story. It was a kingdom, and I was not the heir apparent. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed my father, Theodore Vance, standing by the large bay window in his study. He was on his phone, pacing back and forth, and I could see the unusual excitement in his gestures even from a distance. He was whispering animatedly to my mother, Eleanor, who stood beside him, a glass of Chardonnay already in her hand, though it was barely past noon. They were planning something big. I could feel it in the air. Little did they know, the quiet, unassuming son they were about to welcome home was a ghost of their own making. Beneath my simple, well-worn suit, the one I kept for these family occasions to avoid drawing attention, beat the heart of someone they had drastically, catastrophically underestimated. The bombshell my father was about to drop at the dinner table tonight was meant to change our family forever. And it would, just not in the way he so arrogantly expected. The driver pulled my single suitcase from the trunk. "Should I wait, Mr. Vance?" he asked. "No, that's all right, thank you," I said, handing him a crisp bill. "I'll arrange for my own transport later." He nodded and drove away, leaving me alone in the silence of the manicured grounds. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. For 10 years, I had been a ghost. For 10 years, I had been building an army in the shadows while they lived in their sunlit castle, completely oblivious. Tonight, the ghost was coming home, and the walls of that castle were about to come tumbling down. If you are watching this and have ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been told your dreams were impractical, then you know the fire that was burning inside me. It wasn't just about business or inheritance. It was about being seen, and I was about to make damn sure they could never look through me again. I walked up the stone steps I had climbed thousands of times before, my hand steady as I reached for the polished brass doorknob. The charade was about to begin. To understand what was about to happen, you need to understand the world I grew up in. The Vance name was synonymous with success in Boston's business circles, and my father never let anyone, especially his children, forget it. Vance Dynamics wasn't just a company. It was his legacy, his monument to himself. But it wasn't his to begin with. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, was the real genius. He started Vance Dynamics in his garage back in 1978 with nothing but a second-hand computer and a revolutionary idea for inventory management software. He was a brilliant, humble man who built the company from the ground up into a regional powerhouse. He saw the spark in me, the same passion for technology that he had. He was the one who bought me my first coding manual when I was 12. He used to say, "Caleb, you've got the gift. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Then my father, Theodore, took over in 1995. Dad was a businessman, not a tech guy. He was aggressive, charming, and ruthless. He expanded the company from a $10 million family business into a $50 million enterprise. Every holiday dinner, every family vacation, inevitably turned into a celebration of his business genius. He was the king and we were his court. There were 3 of us Vance sons. My older brother, Preston, 38, was the golden child, the crown prince. Despite never showing any real aptitude for the business, he was anointed the heir from birth. He majored in communications, partied his way through college, and still, Dad handed him a vice president position the day after graduation. Preston spent more time on his boat, the Vance Legacy, or with his rotating cast of girlfriends than he ever did in the office. I remember one time when we were in college, I spent a whole semester developing a streamlined data processing algorithm. I showed it to Preston, excited. 3 weeks later, he presented a watered-down version of it in his business class and got an A. When I confronted him, he just laughed and said, "Relax, little brother. It's called delegating." My father heard about it and clapped him on the back, praising his strategic vision. That was the first time my own work was stolen from me, and my family celebrated the thief. Then there was me, Caleb, perpetually stuck in the middle at 32. Unlike my brothers, I inherited my grandfather's passion. I built my first app at 15. I studied computer science and business at MIT, graduated top of my class, and had legitimate, innovative ideas for modernizing the company. Yet, my father always looked right through me. My younger brother, Sterling, 29, rounded out our trio. He leveraged our family name to become a vapid lifestyle guru on social media. His entire brand was built around posting curated glimpses into old money New England living. He had hundreds of thousands of followers who loved his posts about yachts, expensive cars, and being a Vance heir. But he'd never contributed a single thing of value to the company's success. And my mother, Eleanor. She came from old Boston money and approached family conflict the way all proper Beacon Hill wives did, by ignoring it completely and pouring another glass of Chardonnay. She played the peacekeeper but ultimately enabled my father's worst behaviors, especially his blatant favoritism and his dismissal of my business acumen. "Theodore, maybe you should listen to Caleb's idea," she would occasionally suggest, only to immediately back down when Dad shot her that look. "Eleanor, please," he'd say. "This is actual business we're discussing." And that was the end of it. This was the family I was coming home to, a dynasty built on one man's ego, propped up by an undeserving heir, and documented by a hollow social media star. The breaking point, the moment that shattered any lingering hope I had for my place in the family, came when I was 22. I was fresh out of MIT, full of ideas and ambition. I had spent the last year of college developing a comprehensive cloud-based integration solution. It was years ahead of its time, a project that could have revolutionized our product line and secured Vance Dynamics' future for another decade. I poured everything I had into it. Months of research, market analysis, technical specifications, and a business plan so detailed it was practically a manual for implementation. After weeks of pestering, my father finally agreed to let me pitch it during a board meeting. He called it a professional courtesy, a phrase that should have been a red flag, but I was naive. I thought this was my chance to finally prove myself, to make him see me. I still remember walking into that mahogany-paneled boardroom. The air was thick with the smell of old leather and entitlement. The board members, all men in their 50s and 60s who had been my father's friends for decades, watched with polite but distant expressions as I connected my laptop to the projector. My heart was pounding, a frantic mix of nervousness and excitement. I began my presentation. I spoke about market trends, about the inevitable shift to the cloud, about the elegance and efficiency of my solution. For the first few minutes, I thought I had them. I saw a few of them nodding, taking notes. Then, 10 minutes in, my father checked his watch. It was a loud, deliberate gesture. He sighed, a theatrical sound of boredom, and raised his hand to stop me mid-sentence. "I think we've seen enough," he said. His voice was calm, but his smile was tight and didn't reach his eyes. "Caleb, son, this is all very creative." He let the word hang in the air like an insult. "But it's completely impractical for a serious enterprise like ours. Our clients want stability, not these experimental technologies." He turned to the board members with an apologetic shrug, as if I were a child who had just shown them a macaroni art project. "My son recently graduated college and is full of these academic ideas. Now," he said, his voice shifting back to business, "shall we move on to actual matters? Preston has an update on the Westfield account." The humiliation burned through me like acid. It was so sudden, so absolute, I just stood there, speechless, as they all chuckled and moved on as if I had never been there. I had to pack up my laptop and my presentation materials while my own brother, Preston, stood up and began talking about a golf outing he'd had with a client. The transition was seamless. I had been erased. I walked out of that boardroom in a daze. I didn't even go back to my desk. I walked right out of the building and just kept walking. As I passed the corner of the building, I heard voices from my father's office window, which was slightly ajar. It was him and Preston. Preston was laughing. Academic ideas? That was generous, Dad. I didn't understand a word of that nerd talk. My father's voice, full of warmth I'd never heard directed at me, replied, "Don't you worry about him. He'll find a little coding job somewhere and be perfectly happy. That's why I have you, son. To handle the real world. To run this company." That was it. That was the moment my heart turned to stone. It wasn't just that he had dismissed my idea. It was the casual cruelty of it. The confirmation that he saw me as nothing more than a nerdy little boy, unfit for the world he and Preston inhabited. That night, I packed a single bag, emptied my small bank account, and bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. I landed in San Francisco with $5,000 in savings and a fire in my gut. My parents, when they finally realized I wasn't just staying at a friend's house, assumed it was a phase, a tantrum. "He'll be back when he runs out of money." I overheard my father telling my mother during one of our few, stilted phone calls. That condescension was the only fuel I needed. Those first few years were brutal. I found a tiny studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors breathing through the paper-thin walls. The rent consumed nearly my entire monthly budget. I survived on instant ramen and coffee from the 24-hour diner down the street. I worked 80-hour weeks, first at entry-level coding jobs where I was overqualified but desperate, then as a freelance developer, taking any project I could get my hands on. I remember one particularly low point. It was about 6 months in. I had just lost a freelance gig, my rent was due, and I had about $50 to my name. I was sitting on the floor of my empty apartment, eating a packet of dry ramen because my gas had been shut off, and I just broke down. For a moment, I thought about calling home, about admitting defeat. The thought of my father's smug, "I told you so," was the only thing that stopped me. I wiped my eyes, got up, walked to the library, and used their free Wi-Fi to apply for 3 more jobs. I got one of them the next day. Every dollar I could save went into building my own company. I created Apex Innovations, but I did it under a pseudonym, C.J. Stone. The initials stood for Caleb James, but nobody needed to know that. I wanted my success or my failure to be completely disconnected from the Vance name. I was determined to build something that was mine and mine alone. I started small, developing custom enterprise solutions for startups, reinvesting every single penny of profit. The work was grueling. There were nights I slept under my desk, using a rolled-up hoodie as a pillow, just to meet a deadline. By year 3, I had 10 employees and a real office in Soma. It wasn't much, but it was ours. The breakthrough came from the ashes of my greatest humiliation. I took the core concept of the cloud integration platform, the one my father had dismissed as impractical, and I rebuilt it from the ground up. I refined it, made it more adaptable, and launched it as our flagship product. It solved a problem every legacy company was facing: how to connect their outdated systems with modern cloud architecture. It was an instant success. Venture capital came calling, but I was cautious. I maintained majority ownership, determined to never again lose control of my own destiny. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The very idea that my father had laughed out of his boardroom was now the foundation of my empire. And he had absolutely no idea. I was still just his disappointing son, playing with computers out in California. The thought of it was the only thing that kept me warm during those long, cold, lonely nights. Just when things were starting to look up, my family found a way to wound me, even from 3,000 miles away. Apex was about 2 years old, and we were finally gaining some traction. We were still a small team running on fumes and passion, but our product was good, and people were starting to notice. I had a major meeting scheduled with a man named Marcus Thorne, a well-respected angel investor in the Valley. Getting this meeting was a huge deal. His investment would have been a game-changer, allowing us to scale up, hire more engineers, and really compete. I spent weeks preparing. I refined my pitch until I could recite it in my sleep. I knew our numbers inside and out. I felt ready. The meeting went better than I could have dreamed. Marcus was sharp, he asked all the right questions, and he understood the potential of our platform immediately. He saw what my own father couldn't. At the end of our 2-hour meeting, he shook my hand firmly. "CJ," he said, "I'm impressed. Very impressed. Send me the final paperwork. Barring any major red flags from due diligence, I'm in." I walked out of that office feeling like I was floating on air. I called my small team, and we had a mini celebration over cheap pizza and beer. For the first time, it felt like all the sacrifice, all the 80-hour weeks were about to pay off. That night, I actually allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe I could really do this. A week went by, then 2. My follow-up emails to Marcus went unanswered. My calls went straight to his voicemail. The silence was deafening. Finally, after the 3rd week, I got a curt, 1-sentence email from his assistant. "Mr. Thorne has decided to pass on this investment opportunity." No explanation, no feedback, nothing. I was devastated. It didn't make any sense. The meeting had been perfect. I racked my brain, going over every word, every slide, trying to figure out what I had done wrong. The rejection sent us reeling. We had to lay off 2 of our 10 employees. We were back to surviving on ramen and sheer willpower. It took me almost a year to find out what really happened. I ran into a junior analyst who used to work for Thorne's firm at a tech conference. We got to talking, and I mentioned the deal that fell through. He got a strange look on his face. "Apex Innovations, CJ Stone." "Wait a minute," he said, lowering his voice. "We were all set to go on that deal. Marcus loved you guys." But then he got a call. "A call? From who?" I asked, my blood running cold. "Some guy from the East Coast. Preston Vance, I think his name was. Said he was your brother. He told Marcus that you, CJ Stone, were actually Caleb Vance and that you were unstable. He said you had a history of mental health issues, that you'd been cut off from the family for being unreliable and erratic. He warned Marcus that investing in you was a huge risk." I just stood there, the noise of the conference fading into a dull roar in my ears. Preston, my own brother. He hadn't just watched me get humiliated. He had actively, maliciously tried to destroy me. He had used the family name, the one I had tried so hard to escape, as a weapon to poison my future. It wasn't just business rivalry. It was personal. It was cruel. That was the day the fire in my gut turned to ice. My mission was no longer just about proving them wrong. It was about dismantling their world piece by piece with the same cold, calculated precision they had used to try and break me. The betrayal from Preston changed the game. It solidified a cold, hard resolve in me that had been simmering for years. There would be no more second chances, no more lingering hope for reconciliation. This was now a war, and I was going to win it on my own terms. I threw myself back into Apex with a renewed, almost terrifying focus. I worked not just to succeed, but to build an unbreachable fortress. I secured a different round of funding from a smaller, less-known firm, giving up more equity than I wanted, but it was a necessary step. We grew slowly at first, then with accelerating momentum. My reputation as the brilliant, reclusive CJ Stone began to grow. I rarely gave interviews or appeared at industry events. When I absolutely had to, I used subtle changes to my appearance and let my COO do most of the talking. My anonymity was my greatest weapon. My family remained completely unaware. During our rare holiday calls, I kept my updates vague. Things are going okay. Still figuring things out. My father never pressed for details. In his mind, I was a lost cause, and that suited me perfectly. For the next 7 years, I executed a silent, meticulous plan. It wasn't just about growing Apex into a powerhouse. It was about strategically weaving a web around Vance Dynamics. I started by studying their quarterly reports, their client lists, their supplier contracts, all publicly available information. I identified their weaknesses, and there were many. Their technology was becoming obsolete, their management was bloated, and their market share was slowly bleeding out to more agile competitors. My first move was quiet. I used a shell corporation under Apex to begin acquiring small, non-controlling stakes in Nexus Technologies, one of Advanced Dynamics' key software suppliers. It was a small investment, nothing that would raise any red flags. 6 months later, I did the same with DataStream Solutions, their primary data hosting provider. Then I went bigger. I learned that TechCore Industries, the company that manufactured a critical hardware component for their flagship product, was struggling financially. As CJ Stone, I approached them not with a hostile takeover, but with a partnership offer. Apex would provide a massive capital infusion and technology upgrade in exchange for a majority stake and 2 seats on their board. They agreed. Overnight, I controlled the supply of the most important component in my father's product line. All the while, my father was oblivious. I read an interview he gave in a Boston Business Journal where he complained about unprecedented supply chain pressures. I had to laugh. The pressure was coming from his own son's office in San Francisco. He was fighting a ghost. He even launched a small internal investigation to identify the hostile market forces affecting his suppliers, never once suspecting the force was his own blood. The final piece of the puzzle was acquiring majority stakes in his 2 biggest clients, McKinsey Manufacturing and Westfield Distribution, through similar strategic investments. I had them surrounded. Advanced Dynamics was an island, and I controlled all the bridges. My revenge wouldn't be a loud, angry confrontation. It would be a quiet, elegant checkmate. 10 years after I had left with nothing but a bag and a broken heart, I returned home for Thanksgiving. This time I wasn't flying coach. I took a private jet, an indulgence I rarely used, but this trip warranted the exception. As the jet descended towards a private airfield outside Boston, I looked down at the familiar landscape, a strange mix of nostalgia and cold determination hardening within me. A black Bentley was waiting on the tarmac. Another calculated move. I wanted them to see glimpses of my success before the final revelation. As we drove through the familiar neighborhoods, past old brick buildings and tree-lined streets, I felt like a general returning to a conquered land. The Vance family estate looked exactly as it always had. Imposing, perfect, and cold. I instructed the driver to wait and walked up the steps. My mother, Eleanor, answered the door herself, her eyes widening slightly as she took in my appearance. I had deliberately chosen my wardrobe to make a statement. Gone were the worn-out suits they associated with me. I wore a tailored Armani suit that probably cost more than my first car, a Patek Philippe watch on my wrist, and shoes that announced their expense with every quiet step on the marble floor. "Caleb, darling," she said, embracing me with the scent of expensive perfume and the faint note of midday wine on her breath. "You look different. Is that a Rolex?" "Patek Philippe, actually," I said, returning her hug. "Good to see you, Mom." She ushered me inside, chattering about Thanksgiving preparations and Sterling's latest Instagram milestone. I nodded politely, setting my bag down in the grand foyer. "Home sweet home. Your father is in his study," she said. "He's been so busy with some big deal." "Very hush-hush." I smiled. "I'll go say hello." The study had always been my father's sanctuary, a fortress of leather and mahogany. I knocked once and entered without waiting for a response, a small act of defiance. He looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face before settling into his usual mild disinterest. "Caleb, you made it." He stood for a brief, awkward hug. "The trip was very smooth," I said deliberately, choosing not to take the offered seat. "I flew private. Saves time." A flicker of confusion crossed his features. "Private? That must have been expensive." I just shrugged. "Business is good." Before he could inquire further, his phone rang. "Excuse me, this is important," he said, turning away. As he spoke, I glanced at the papers on his desk, and there it was, the acquisition proposal from Apex Innovations, my company logo displayed prominently at the top. My heart raced, but I kept my composure. He finished his call and hastily gathered the papers into a folder. "Sorry about that," he said. "Big things happening at the company. You wouldn't understand." The familiar dismissal, the casual condescension. 10 years ago, it would have cut me to the bone. Now it just rolled off me like water. I was holding an ocean, and he was trying to drown me in a teacup. "Of course, Dad," I said, my voice even. "I'll let you get back to it." The game was on. I went upstairs to my old bedroom, which my mother had maintained as a kind of shrine to my teenage self. Debate trophies and computer science awards gathered dust on the shelves, testaments to achievements that had never impressed the one person whose approval I had once sought most. I showered and changed, then headed downstairs, steeling myself for the inevitable family reunion. I found Preston in the living room, a glass of scotch in his hand at 3 in the afternoon. He'd put on weight, a privileged softness around his middle, but he still had our father's confident posture. Well, the prodigal son returns," he said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Still playing with computers out in California?" "Something like that," I replied with a tight smile. "How's that little startup of yours doing? Making any money yet?" His condescension was so familiar it was almost comforting, a reminder of exactly why I was here. Before I could answer, Sterling burst into the room, phone held at the perfect angle to capture his entrance for his Instagram followers. "Caleb's here, everyone. Family reunion time," he announced to his phone before air-kissing my cheeks. "You look expensive, bro. Did you finally land a rich investor?" "No, just working hard," I said, stepping out of his camera frame. The pre-dinner drinks hour was excruciating. My mother fluttered about with forced cheerfulness. My father checked his phone every 3 minutes. Preston bragged about his new boat to anyone who would listen, and Sterling documented the entire charade for his online audience. I sipped my wine slowly, observing them. I was no longer the hurt son seeking validation. I was a CEO conducting market research on his latest and most personal acquisition. During a lull in the conversation, my father's voice, raised in excitement, carried from his study down the hall. The door was ajar. "Yes, absolutely. Tomorrow after Thanksgiving. 50 million is the final offer. Apex Innovations has been very insistent on the terms." I excused myself and walked toward the kitchen, needing a moment alone. Maria, our housekeeper of 20 years, was preparing vegetables for the feast. She had always been kinder to me than my own family. "Mr. Caleb," she smiled warmly. "It is good to see you. You look well. California agrees with you." "Thanks, Maria. It's good to be home," I lied. She nodded toward the study. "Your father has big news," he says. "A big day tomorrow." "So I gather," I said, my voice quiet. The whole house was buzzing with a secret that was about to become my victory. I took a deep breath. The calm before the storm. Dinner was about to be served, and with it, a reckoning 10 years in the making. Dinner was, as always, a formal affair. The massive mahogany table gleamed under the crystal chandelier, set with the Wedgwood china that only emerged for special occasions. We took our designated seats. My father, Theodore, at the head of the table. My mother, Eleanor, at the opposite end. Preston, the heir, sat at Dad's right hand. Sterling, the court jester, sat to his left. And I was placed at the far end, next to my mother, as far from the center of power as physically possible. It was a perfect metaphor for my entire life in this house. The food came out, course after course of perfectly executed tradition. Dad carved the turkey with ceremonial precision while Sterling filmed it for his social media, providing a running commentary. And here's Dad carving the turkey, just like his father before him, continuing the Vance family tradition of excellence. I caught my mother wincing slightly before she took a large sip of her wine. It was her 4th glass by my count. After our plates were filled, Dad raised his glass for the traditional Vance family gratitude ritual. It was another performance, a competitive status report disguised as thanks. Preston went first. "I'm thankful for another record-breaking quarter at Vance Dynamics," he began, though I knew from my own research that they'd lost market share for the 3rd consecutive quarter. And for my new 42-foot yacht, the Vance legacy. And, of course, for my health. Sterling went next, phone still in hand. I am so thankful to have reached 1 million followers this year. My collaboration with Lux Life has been amazing, and I'm just so grateful to be a Vance and represent our family brand to the world. He beamed at Dad, who nodded approvingly. When my turn came, I set down my fork and spoke clearly, my voice cutting through the clatter of silverware. I'm thankful for the lessons life has taught me. I began, looking around the table, that sometimes rejection is a redirection, that persistence matters more than privilege. I paused, then looked directly at my father, and that sometimes the only way to earn your place at the table is to buy the table. A confused frown flickered across my father's face. He sensed something in my tone but couldn't place it. He quickly moved on to his own gratitude speech, which predictably centered on the business legacy he had built. The storm was coming. The air in the room was getting heavy, charged with unspoken tensions and a secret that was about to blow this family apart. As Maria brought in the pumpkin and pecan pies, my father tapped his knife against his crystal water glass. The sharp ping cut through the dinner conversation. The room fell silent. Even Sterling lowered his phone. I have an announcement to make, he said, standing at the head of the table. He had the posture of a king addressing his subjects. It's one that affects everyone here. He paused dramatically, letting the suspense build. As you know, I have dedicated my life to building Vance Dynamics into a leader in our industry. But all good things must evolve. The time has come for a change. He looked around the table, his expression unreadable. I have decided to sell the company. The reaction was immediate. Preston choked on his wine. What? Dad, you can't be serious. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I've been in negotiations for months, Dad continued, raising a hand for silence. The deal will be finalized tomorrow. Sterling was aghast. But Daddy, what about the Vance legacy? My brand is built around being a Vance Dynamics heir. That brings me to the second part of my announcement, Dad said, his voice firm. The proceeds from the sale will not be going to you children as an inheritance. Now both Preston and Sterling erupted. That's our birthright. Preston slammed his fist on the table, rattling the china. His face was flushed with anger. What do you mean? Where is the money going? Sterling wailed, and to my astonishment, he was now live-streaming the family drama to his followers, tears welling in his eyes. Your mother and I will be using part of it for our retirement, Dad explained calmly. The rest will go to establishing the Vance Foundation, a charitable organization to support technology education. This is insane. Preston stood up, his chair scraping loudly. I've given 10 years of my life to this company. You promised it would be mine someday. Throughout the chaos, I remained perfectly still. I took a small, deliberate bite of my pecan pie. The rich, sweet flavor was a stark contrast to the bitterness filling the room. My calmness seemed to unnerve my mother. She looked at me, her eyes narrowed. Caleb, she said quietly, you don't seem surprised. The table gradually quieted as everyone turned to look at me, suddenly remembering I was there. Actually, I said, setting down my dessert fork with precision. I just have one question. I looked directly at my father, who was still standing, puffed up with the importance of his own announcement. Who is the buyer? A proud, smug smile spread across his face. He was pleased to have this final piece of information, this last vestige of power. A very successful tech investment firm. Perhaps you've heard of them, even out in California. They're called Apex Innovations. He savored the name. They're paying $50 million, which is more than generous given our recent market challenges. I took a slow sip of water, using the moment to steady myself. The room felt charged, suspended in time. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times, but nothing could prepare me for the reality of it. I placed my glass down and met my father's gaze. Dad? I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence. I am Apex Innovations. Thank you for staying with me until now. Please show your support by liking this video and typing 1 in the comments below. It lets me know that you've given me a like and are here with me on this journey. Your encouragement is a huge source of motivation. Comment number 1 below and stay with me as I continue my story. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. The only sound in the room was the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking the seconds of frozen disbelief. The air itself felt thick, solidified around us. I watched the emotions play across my father's face in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally, the first flickers of a deep, burning anger. Preston was the first to react. He knocked over his wine glass as he stood abruptly, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of panic and rage. Sterling, incredibly, was still live-streaming, his hands shaking. "Oh my God," he whispered to his phone. "Did my brother just say he owns the company that's buying our family business? This is preposterous." My father finally sputtered, finding his voice. "Apex Innovations is run by CJ Stone, a respected technology investor. Not by my son who's been playing at startups in California." I reached into my suit jacket and removed my business card case, made of sleek brushed platinum with the Apex logo engraved on it. I slid a card across the polished table toward him. "Actually, Dad, I am CJ Stone. CJ stands for Caleb James." He snatched up the card, staring at it as if it might bite him. "This is some kind of joke." But his voice had lost its certainty. "It's no joke," I said, my voice hardening. "I founded Apex Innovations 10 years ago, right after you dismissed my business proposal and humiliated me in front of your board. While you thought I was failing, I was building a company that is currently valued at $200 million. The number hung in the air, a weapon in itself. "You've been spying on us," Preston accused, his face mottled with rage. "That's corporate espionage." "No, Preston. It's called market research. Everything I learned about Vance Dynamics' weaknesses came from publicly available financial reports and industry analysis. It's amazing what you can find when you actually do the work." I turned back to my father. "The truth is, this company has been failing for years. Your technology is a decade out of date, your management is incompetent, and you've lost 22% of your market share in the last 3 years. The $50 million offer isn't generous. It's a bailout." "How dare you?" he began. "I tried to help you first." I cut him off. 6 months ago, Apex sent an anonymous partnership proposal. The Phoenix proposal. It would have provided the capital and technology you desperately needed while allowing the Vance name to remain. You rejected it without even reading past the first page because your pride couldn't handle accepting help. His eyes widened in recognition. "That was you." "Yes," I confirmed. Then, just as the reality of his situation seemed to be crashing down on him, a sly, triumphant look crossed my father's face. He actually chuckled. "Oh, Caleb," he said, shaking his head with pity. "You always were smart with books, but you know nothing about the real world. You've made a fatal miscalculation." He leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "You forgot about the poison pill." A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through my family. Preston's panicked expression softened into a smirk. Sterling looked up from his phone with renewed hope. My mother, who had been pale and silent, straightened up slightly. They all looked at my father as if he had just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. "A poison pill?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, playing along. "What are you talking about?" My father was in his element now. He was back in control, the king on his throne, explaining the rules of the game to his foolish, naive son. "Years ago," he began, savoring the moment, "I had our lawyers draft a special provision into the company bylaws to prevent exactly this kind of hostile takeover. It's an ironclad defense. It stipulates that any sale of the company to an outside entity requires not just the unanimous approval of the Vance Dynamics board, but also the express written consent of the CEOs of our 3 largest strategic partners." He leaned back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Those partners are Nexus Technologies, DataStream Solutions, and TechCore Industries. Their leaders are my friends. I've played golf with them for 20 years. They have stood by this company for decades. He gestured dismissively at me. So you see, your little plan, as clever as you think it is dead in the water. The board may have approved the sale, but my friends will never, ever sign off on it. They would never betray me. He looked at Preston with a proud wink. The company is safe. Preston laughed out loud, a short, barking sound of victory. You hear that, little brother? You lose. All that scheming for nothing. Sterling chimed in, yeah, nice try, Caleb. Maybe stick to coding. My father held up his hand for silence, enjoying his triumph. This deal is off, he declared. I'll be calling my lawyer first thing in the morning to nullify the agreement based on this provision. You flew all the way out here to monologue and failed. Now, if you'll excuse me, this has been a trying evening. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pity that was more insulting than any anger he could have shown. He truly believed he had won, that my 10-year plan had been thwarted by a dusty clause in a legal document. He thought my meticulous research had missed the one thing that truly mattered. His personal relationships, the real world of handshakes and backroom deals that he was so proud of. He was about to get the final, most important lesson of his business career. I let the silence stretch, allowing them to bask in their false victory for a few moments longer. I took another calm sip of my water. I let them enjoy their moment. I watched the smugness on Preston's face, the relief on my mother's, the arrogant pride radiating from my father. Then, I gently placed my glass back on the table. The poison pill, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly silent room. Yes, I read about it. Section 4, subsection B of the corporate bylaws. A very clever piece of legal work. It's designed to be almost unbreakable. My father nodded, still smiling. Almost? It is unbreakable. It would be, I agreed, if you still had any friends left to enforce it. The smile on his face faltered. What are you talking about? Let's talk about your friends, I said, leaning forward. Let's start with Robert Shin at Nexus Technologies. A good man. He was facing a cash flow crisis about 18 months ago. Apex Innovations, through a subsidiary, offered him a very generous capital infusion. In exchange for that, we acquired a 51% controlling interest in his company. Robert is still the CEO, but he answers to my board now. The color started to drain from my father's face. Then there's Maria Flores at DataStream Solutions. I continued, my voice steady and methodical. Her company's infrastructure was aging. They needed a massive tech overhaul to stay competitive. Apex provided it. We are now the majority shareholder of DataStream Solutions. I paused, letting the information sink in. Preston was no longer smirking. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. And that just leaves David Chun at TechCore Industries, I said, delivering the final blow. Your oldest friend. The man you play golf with every Thursday. He was looking to retire, but he was worried about his employees' futures. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. I bought his company outright 6 months ago for a price that ensured he and his family would be comfortable for generations. David is currently on a beach in Hawaii. The current CEO of TechCore Industries reports directly to me. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. So you see, Dad, when you talk about getting the express written consent of the CEOs of your 3 largest partners, what you're really saying is that you need my permission to block my own acquisition. I reached into my jacket again and pulled out a folded document. I slid it across the table to him. And here it is. The written consent from all 3 of them signed this morning. The poison pill has been neutralized. The sale is final. The company is mine. The room was utterly, completely silent. Theodore Vance, the king, the titan of industry, just stared at the document. His hands were trembling. He didn't look like a king anymore. He just looked like an old man who had been outplayed, outsmarted, and utterly defeated by the son he had never bothered to see. The war was over. I had won. After my father stormed out of the dining room to lock himself in his study, the rest of the family scattered in shock and anger. I retreated to my childhood bedroom, the dusty museum of a boy I no longer was. I needed a moment of quiet, but I knew it wouldn't last. A sharp knock came at the door. I opened it to find Preston, his tie loosened, his face flushed with a combination of anger and alcohol. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the room. He paced the small space like a caged animal. "About what, Preston?" I asked, crossing my arms. "How I ruined your Thanksgiving, or how you ran the company you were supposed to inherit into the ground. You think you're so clever, don't you?" he hissed. "Little Caleb with his computers and his secret identity. Did you enjoy lying to our faces for 10 years? About as much as you enjoyed taking credit for my ideas," I replied evenly. "And about as much as you enjoyed trying to sabotage my first investment deal. Did you really think I wouldn't find out what you said to Marcus Thorne?" He stopped pacing. The color drained from his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I took a step closer. "You told him I was unstable. You used the family name to paint me as a charity case. You tried to destroy my company before it even had a chance to live. You were a nobody," he spat. "You ran off to California to prove some point. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who put in the time." "You put in time, yes. But what did you actually contribute, Preston? Besides a string of failed marketing campaigns and expense reports filled with client dinners at strip clubs? You don't know anything," he snarled. "Oh, I know everything," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, quiet tone. "As part of my due diligence for the acquisition, I've been auditing the company's financials for the past year, including the records you thought were safely hidden on the local server." He took a threatening step toward me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I know about the $300,000, Preston." He froze. "I know about the fake vendor accounts you set up. I know about the phantom consulting fees that went directly to your personal offshore account. I have the transaction records, the account numbers, and the IP logs showing the entries came from your office computer on days when you were the only one in the building. I know everything." He stared at me, speechless, his rage replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. You can't prove any of that." "I can and I will, if you force me to," I said steadily. "I'm not planning to pursue criminal charges. That would create a PR nightmare for the company during the transition. But don't test me. Don't for a second think you have any power here." He just whispered, his hands clenched into fists. "You would destroy your own brother. I would hold accountable a thief who happens to be related to me." I corrected him. "There's a difference." The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I came downstairs at 7 a.m. to find my father waiting for me in the kitchen. He looked older than he had yesterday, the lines around his eyes deeper. He had clearly not slept. "My study, now," was all he said. I followed him into his fortress of ego. He sat behind his massive desk, a position he had used to intimidate people for decades. I chose not to sit in the visitor's chair. Instead, I perched on the edge of the desk, a subtle repositioning of our power dynamic that did not go unnoticed. "My lawyers confirm what you said," he began without preamble. "The sale is legally binding. The poison pill was neutralized. The company is yours." "I know," I said simply. He looked up at me, the arrogance gone, replaced by a weary confusion. How? How did you build something so valuable when you had nothing? No connections. No startup capital. "I had my education," I reminded him. "The one thing you paid for but never valued. And I had a powerful motivation, to prove you wrong." He flinched. "I expected you to fail," he admitted, his voice quiet. 90% of startups do. I thought I was protecting you. By ensuring I never got the chance to try?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's not protection, Dad. That's control." He was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "What are your plans?" I had waited 10 years for him to ask my opinion on business. "Vance Dynamics will become the enterprise division of Apex Innovations. We'll retain about 60% of the staff, with significant changes to upper management. And me, you will be offered a position as chairman emeritus. No operational authority, but you'll maintain an office and can advise on client relationships during the transition. It's a figurehead role, a respected advisory position with a generous salary. His jaw tightened. He stood and walked to the window. And your brothers? Preston has been embezzling from the company for at least 3 years. I informed him bluntly. I have the documentation to prove he stole $300,000 to cover gambling debts. The shock of this revelation seemed to hit him harder than losing the company. He sank back into his chair. That can't be true. The evidence is irrefutable. He has a choice. Resign quietly, agree to a repayment plan, and enroll in an MBA program if he ever wants a future in business. Or face the legal consequences. And Sterling, he whispered. Sterling actually made a compelling case last night, I said, surprising him. His social media skills are legitimately valuable, in the right context. There's a place for him in our new consumer products division, as a brand ambassador. But he'll have a boss, and he'll have performance metrics, just like any other employee. My father looked at me, a complex mixture of shock, defeat, and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. You outmaneuvered me. Completely, he said. Your grandfather, Arthur, would have been impressed. Coming from him, it was the closest thing to approval I had ever received. He extended his hand across the desk. So, Chairman Emeritus. I took his hand, sealing the first professional agreement we had ever made as equals. Welcome to Apex Innovations, Dad. 6 months can feel like a lifetime. The company, now rebranded as Vance Apex Technologies, was thriving. The infusion of Apex's capital and innovation had breathed new life into the dying enterprise. But for my brothers, those 6 months were a brutal lesson in cause and effect. Preston, as per our agreement, had resigned from his executive position. To repay the $300,000 he had stolen, I didn't just garnish his inheritance, which was now under my control. I made him work for it. I gave him a job. He wasn't a vice president anymore. He was an assistant logistics coordinator at one of our warehouses on the outskirts of the city. His salary was minimal, just enough to live on. The rest went directly to paying back the company. I saw him once when I was touring the facility. He was wearing a high-visibility vest and carrying a clipboard. The swagger was gone. His tailored suits were replaced by steel-toed boots. He looked tired and humbled. He saw me watching him from the catwalk, and for a moment, our eyes met. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked resigned. He gave a short, curt nod, then turned back to his work, directing a forklift operator. The golden child was finally learning the value of an honest day's labor. His former colleagues, the ones he used to look down upon, were now his supervisors. There was no better justice than that. His fancy boat, the Vance Legacy, was sold to help cover his debts. Sterling's fall was more public. When the news of the takeover broke, he tried to spin it into a dramatic story for his followers. A tale of family intrigue with him at the center. But the narrative quickly got away from him. Tech journals and business blogs dug into the story, and the truth came out. Vance Dynamics had been failing, and his tech heir persona was a sham. His followers turned on him. The comments sections were brutal. He was called a fraud, a phony, a spoiled brat who had never worked a day in his life. His sponsorships dried up almost overnight. The luxury brands didn't want to be associated with him anymore. His Lux life collapsed. I offered him the brand ambassador job, as promised. He initially scoffed at it, but when he realized his social media career was over and the trust fund spigot had been turned off, he reluctantly accepted. Now, instead of posting pictures from a yacht, he was responsible for managing the social media accounts for our new line of consumer-grade software. He had to respond to customer complaints on Twitter and create engaging content about driver updates. He hated every second of it, but for the first time in his life, he had to show up to a job every day. As for my father, his role as chairman emeritus was, as I'd intended, a gilded cage. He had his office, his salary, his title, but he had no power. He attended meetings as a silent observer, watching me make the decisions he had once believed I was incapable of. He watched me implement the very ideas he had dismissed years ago, and he watched them succeed beyond his wildest dreams. Every success was a quiet, constant reminder of his failure, not just as a CEO, but as a father. While my family was adjusting to their new reality, I was building a life I never thought was possible. The revenge had been satisfying, yes, but I quickly realized that victory is hollow if you have no one to share it with. The first person I reconnected with was my best friend from those early, struggling days in San Francisco, Liam. We had drifted apart as Apex grew, and I became more consumed by my work and my secret mission. I called him a week after that Thanksgiving. "So," he said, after I had told him everything, "the ghost finally came out of the machine." Something like that. I laughed. It felt good to laugh again. We met for a beer that weekend, and it was like no time had passed. Having him back in my life was like finding a part of myself I thought I had lost. My role as CEO of the merged companies meant I had to split my time between San Francisco and Boston. At first, I dreaded returning to the city that held so many painful memories. But now, it was different. I wasn't the forgotten son anymore. I was in charge. I also started dating. For 10 years, my company had been my only partner. I hadn't allowed myself the time or the vulnerability for a real relationship. I met a woman named Clara, an architect who was smart, funny, and had no idea about the Vance family drama until our third date. When I told her, she just listened, then said, "Well, it sounds like they didn't deserve you." It was that simple for her. She saw me for who I was, not for my name or my company. But the most important thing I did had nothing to do with my personal life. I took the foundation my father had intended to create as a monument to himself and I remade it. I established the Arthur Vance Foundation, named after my grandfather. Its mission was simple: to provide scholarships and seed funding for brilliant, underestimated young innovators from underprivileged backgrounds. The kind of kids who had the talent but not the connections. The kind of kid I had been. At the foundation's launch event, I stood at the podium and looked out at the first group of scholarship recipients. I saw the same fire and ambition in their eyes that I had once had. I wasn't just building a company anymore. I was building a legacy my grandfather would have been proud of. I had taken the pain of my past and forged it into a future for others. I was finally free. A year after that fateful dinner, Thanksgiving rolled around again. This time, there was no grand, formal affair. It was just the five of us at a small, round table in the less formal dining room. The tension was still there, a faint echo of the past, but it was different. It was no longer a Cold War. It was more like a fragile, uncertain truce. Preston was quiet. A year of manual labor had stripped him of his arrogance. He spoke about his MBA classes, asking me genuine questions about supply chain management. Sterling showed me a surprisingly clever social media campaign he had designed, a flicker of genuine pride in his work. My mother drank sparkling water instead of wine. After the meal, as I was standing by the fireplace, my father approached me. He looked older, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes were clearer than I had seen them in years. "The Q3 reports were impressive," he said. It was his way of starting a conversation now, through business. "The new integration platform is performing well above projections," I replied. We stood in silence for a long moment, watching the fire. The decades of misunderstanding and unspoken resentment felt like a tangible presence between us. "You know," he said finally, his voice raspy, "when you were a boy, maybe 10 years old, you took apart the brand new computer I bought for the office. I was furious. I yelled at you for an hour. I remembered. I was just trying to see how it worked. I know that now," he said. "You put it all back together, and it worked faster than before. You had overclocked the processor. I didn't even know what that meant." He shook his head. "I should have seen it then. I should have paid attention." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he took out a worn, faded photograph. It was a picture of me as a little boy, sitting at that very computer, a look of intense concentration on my face. "I've kept this with me all these years," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't place. He handed the photo to me. He cleared his throat. "Your grandfather, Arthur. He would be so proud of you." He paused, struggling with the words. "And so am I." He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't have to. In that single, quiet moment, with that old photograph passed between us, a lifetime of hurt began to dissolve. I looked down at the picture of the little boy who just wanted to be seen, and I realized he finally was. The war was truly over. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been a long and difficult journey, and sharing it means a lot to me. I'm curious, have any of you ever experienced challenges in a family business? Or felt like your voice wasn't being heard by those closest to you? Please share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. I read every one, and if my journey resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories. Your support truly makes a difference.